Hey guys, this is Pedro back with another interview covering VCT Americas Stage 2 playoffs. For this occasion, I have here with me another broadcast summit that I'm going to be talking to for the duration I'm here in Los Angeles. Doug, now no longer EsportsDoug, is now just Doug. Doug, I'm sure for those of you that have been paying attention to my channel, you guys know that I've already talked to him before, but now I have him here once again for another quick conversation during set playoffs. So, Doug, I really do appreciate you taking the time and making this happen once again. First and foremost, I'm going to ask you the obvious initial questions that I always do for these kinds of interviews. How are you doing?
Not bad. Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm doing well, man. It's thank you for having me again. It's always good to chat with you. Playoffs is in full swing. We just have 2 days left? Yeah, 2 days left. We're almost done. I think I'm really excited to see how the year closes out. This should be a good one.
For sure. I mean, speaking of other things that kind of are winding down or already finished, I mean, gotta ask you, since you're Colombian, I gotta ask you about what happened in Sunday, or last Sunday, losing to Argentina in the Copa America final. What was the feeling like, and why did you feel like you got that jinx back after jinxing Brand over on Twitter?
Yeah, man, I should have known as soon as I tweeted that it's not coming home that I had made a terrible mistake. It's funny. This year was the first time in a really long time that I had more intently watched Euros and Copa, and obviously watching Colombia get to the final was really cool, but it was messy on the other side, right? Like, it just felt like destiny that he was going to win. So bittersweet, and I'm happy for him because he's one of the GOATs. He's the GOAT. But yeah, it would have been nice if that had ended a different way. It was a banger of a tournament no matter what, though. I'm still a little bitter, and yes, this may have been self-imposed, but all good.
No, for sure. I mean, still, it's an accomplishment for making the final for the first time in around 23 years. That time being beating Mexico, my country. I'm not going to say any more about that. But still, still good to see Colombia even make it to that point. And the same thing can be said about you, getting to this point after a long and arduous season, I would say, on the broadcast side. I mean, I had the pleasure of talking to you, just focusing on how you kind of look back on your 2023 overall season. So I'm going to do the same kind of copy and paste over here. 1 year has passed. 2024 is almost wrapped up. How do you kind of look back on your work in the broadcast side for 2024?
That's a good question. This year, in a lot of ways, has been very fulfilling and also very challenging. I think the year, I missed Madrid at the very beginning, but it feels like the year has been a very long year. And I think as I reflect on how the year has gone, I think there have been a lot of high highs. I think obviously getting the opportunity to cast the finals in Shanghai was something that was really special. But I also, it's been a tiring year. I love it. Again, the highs have been the highest they've ever been. But it's been a tiring year. That's probably the best way I can describe it so far.
Gotta ask you now, obviously, about Masters Shanghai, making the grand finals, doing that, having the honor to just cast that match alongside babybay. I mean, as I said, I've been able to talk to you. I believe it was one of your goals to even make it to that point in the international side, casting the grand finals. You were already able to do that on the domestic side up to that point, but still, casting the Masters Shanghai grand finals. What was that atmosphere like for you?
It was super special, man. I'm not going to lie to you. To get to walk into the Mercedes-Benz Arena on that Sunday and see north of 10,000 people there was just really, really special. I think, I've told you that was something that I had been pursuing and working towards and wanted for so many years. It was just really special to be able to do that. The crowd was incredible. I mean, I started a slow clap in the arena with 10,000 people. That's just such that's such a fun thing to be able to say. And I think when you push for something and when you chase something for so long, it gets so little emotional when you get it. I think there were a few times right before the throw that were just like a very much, I really wanted to like soak it all in. I really wanted to take a step back and really smell the roses, so to speak, and really just kind of appreciate the moment for what it was. And then I'll admit, I mean, after I had hit the closing call and the confetti was falling everywhere, I cried. It was just such a really special moment to be able to be a part of, to be able to tell that story, to be able to do it over 5 maps. I mean, that's just you couldn't ask for much more.
Gotta ask you, was that the peak of your career when you were breaking down, you just relishing everything that was happening to you and even alongside babybay? Was that it?
Yeah, so far, for sure. I mean, I think it's every commentator's dream to be able to cast an international final in a sold-out arena on the biggest stage that your respective sport has had up until that point. So 1,000% a peak, yeah. And it's something I'll never forget.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it wasn't just you that did the cast. Obviously, you had babybay by your side, a partner that you've been working with much more closely on the casting side for 2024. Obviously, you know, as everyone knows, you've been a man of many casting partners. You know, last year was you and Bala, and then even before that, mentioning the names that I can't really say off the top of my head. Apologies for that.
There are a lot.
But still, you know, I already asked babybay a little bit about how that kind of partnership formed when I talked to him before the time of this recording. So I'm gonna do the same kind of thing to you. You know, from your point of view, when did this whole thing kind of start between yourself and babybay, and how did you kind of see the progression of this partnership since that point?
Yeah, so it kind of came about at the end of last year. Bala had mentioned that he didn't want to be traveling as much anymore. He wanted to be at home with his family, which obviously completely respect and understand. So I needed a color caster, and I knew that babybay had been trialing for a couple of teams, and we got to spend a little bit more time in Sao Paulo for Game Changers Championships. Got to pick his brain on a couple of things, what he wanted to do next year, and things of that nature. And once I kind of caught wind that he was in between, still had a couple of options to choose from, and he wasn't fully sold on what it was that he wanted to do, I sold him pretty heavy on commentary, and I was able to call him over to the dark side, if you will, and bring him in as a color caster. And I think if you think about the trajectory and the improvements that he's made from his very first cast up until, even 2 to 3 weeks after his very first cast, the improvements that he has shown were just tremendous. I think he is obviously still very young, right? It's his first year doing this. But again, the improvements and the drastic changes that he's shown from day one up until now are tremendous. And I think when you think about how many years people have been doing things like this, think about every other color caster that we have in VALORANT, or in Americas at least. Steele is the exception in EMEA because he's also very new, but those two are ones who have started this year and are like coming along so insanely fast, and they're doing it surrounded by people who've been doing it for 5 years, 10 in a lot of instances. So it's just outrageously impressive.
For sure. What do you think has been some of the aspects that kind of stood out to you when it comes to learning with babybay and just having to bounce off of him casting wise, and also in addition to that, what kind of adjustment did you make for yourself in terms of just going from someone like Bala over to babybay, just kind of working off of those two facets?
Yeah, I think with Bala, in a lot of ways it was easier because he was so good at what he did, and because he had been doing it for so long. He was much more polished, much more proficient in the technical things, right? And so I was able to focus more on just me doing my thing and know that I had a very strong color who was going to do his thing, and it was just easier to focus on that. And with Dre, again, because he's so new, which is perfectly fine, but because he's so new, there's just been a lot more focus on how do I bring him along, how do I make sure that we sound good together and tell a cohesive story together. So it's just been a different mindset, I think, a different approach. And again, how well Dre has responded to all of that stuff has just been incredible. His commitment to getting better, to thinking about commentary, to doing all of those things, I think has been, the main reason why he's improved so much in such a short amount of time.
Did it even surprise you at all for him to just make this switch and just be so good at it with not even a year into his career casting wise? Did it even surprise you? And also, did you even have doubts, coming into this that maybe, babybay wasn't going to be as, getting used to it so quickly?
I wouldn't say I had any doubts, no. I think he's competitive and he likes to be good at what he does. So when you put him in really anybody who's wired that way, in any scenario like that will push you and make you uncomfortable and show where you're weak at something, the natural response is to double down and to commit to working and improving at whatever it is that it is. So I never had any doubts. I knew that with time and with work, he would become what he is now and what he's going to continue to be and become and grow into over the next however long he decides to take this path.
For sure. And now I kind of want to ask you I don't know what's going on with me. Now I kind of want to ask you more about yourself and just getting back into just kind of how you've been doing in 2024, having to just kind of do the usual things that you usually do, working as an analyst, being a caster, just doing everything else, maybe do other things outside of that, continuing your streaming career on Twitch. What do you think has been some of the biggest difficulties, if that's the appropriate thing to say, about this year and kind of adjustment you had to make for yourself and just kind of building off of the success / momentum that you've been up to this point?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think to go back to the conversation we were just having, I think just in large part because so much of my focus this year has been on bringing Dre up and bringing him along and kind of help mold him into what I believe he can be as a color caster. I think naturally because of that, it's just been a much, just harder year compared to last year. Again, with Bala, I was hands off. There were things I was learning from Bala. I think very highly of him and how good of a color caster he was up until the very last day that he showed it. So when you compare those two, or even just comparing last year to this year, I think that's just such a big change that naturally has a lot of impact on how the year has felt. And so again, in a lot of ways, in every way, I would argue that this has been the most challenging year of my career, but also the most fulfilling and the most satisfying in many ways. And I imagine there's a very direct correlation between the two.
I think another facet, as you kind of alluded to, is just on top of just having to bring babybay in, just having him get used to this new environment, just also kind of like showing the ropes to other people that are kind of coming into this VCT Americas broadcast channel. Some of the people that kind of look at his Uber, but Uber he's already experienced, but more so he's kind of coming back into covering Valorant. I think another people kind of comes up to mind is Liz, and also I think Akeem also hasn't had as much experience in broadcasting Valorant compared to other people. More so just focusing on just the entire team. How do you kind of look at how the new blood, kind of getting into the VCT Americas broadcast team, and what kind of changes have you seen in terms of their inclusion for this year? Yeah,
we have a lot of really exciting things to think about for the future when it comes to talent. I think you mentioned Mitch. He's a world-class, award-winning commentator, so you know That will upgrade this show no matter what. But then, yeah, also a lot of this new blood that we're getting in. I think of Liz and I think of Akeem, and I think about how humble they both have been coming into it. I think it's really easy to have imposter syndrome. I remember going through that and feeling that way, and some days I still do. But they've just been so humble and so teachable and so be willing to listen to feedback and seek out feedback. I think Liz in particular is someone who I chat with on a fairly regular basis about all things like work and, feedback here. What do you think about this? Things like that. And they both have just soaked everything up. So I think when you've got people who are willing to step out of their comfort zone, who are willing to be humble and to be teachable and not just take that feedback, but also apply it and put the work in, that's a really good sign for the future, man, because those are the kind of pieces that you want to be building around. That's something that stands the test of time, 3 years, 5, however long they want to commit to it. Because I think as you continue to be hungry and you continue to want to improve, that work will pay off. It will pay off, and it'll pay off if you've been doing it for a month or if you've been doing it for 18 years.
Has there been kind of any resemblance from, seeing them and seeing how you kind of started out in Valorant in terms of just getting used to a new game and stuff like that? Did you see any resemblance? And if so, what kind of aspect do you kind of see that kind of resembles the early Doug to those aforementioned people?
Yeah, it's a good question too. I think I'm going to say no, because the people that are coming in are so talented, and they're starting miles ahead of where it felt like I was starting. It felt like, for me, it took a lot of very intentional work. And I think they benefit from, Akeem, Liz, benefit from being brought into a system that is so selfless. Because I would say this about literally anybody on our talent team, and this is genuinely why I love this show, is because you can ask anybody going down that list, the show is bigger than they are. They care about the product that's being put out more than themselves, more than how much camera time you're getting, more than whether or not you sound smart on the desk or in the cast or whatever it is. And when you have a structure like that, new people, experienced people, whatever, they thrive. And so in a lot of ways, they're set up super well. I'm really excited to see what their careers look like in a couple of years, because I think they're going to be taking over. I mean, Mimi's another really good example of that. And you can make the argument that she's more experienced, because she is. But there's just so much talent in a lot of these new additions to the team. And also shout out to the production team behind the scenes for being able to identify that talent in a lot of these new people and bring them along. I think you can make bad calls, and Riot in the Americas side of things has a really good nose for talent.
For sure. Out of curiosity, I want to ask you, which broadcast team has the best broadcast talent? VCT Americas, VCT EMEA, VCT Pacific? I mean, what do you think?
I'm obviously a little biased on that. I do genuinely think that I love our product, man. I really do love our product. I love how collaborative everything feels. Everything from how we're building the stories and meetings, how it feels like every single story point that's being put together is a part of a grander narrative. And I'm very thankful for the collaboration and the cohesiveness that we show on this team. Because I do think ultimately at the end of the day, that's what shows. And there's such a good mix. I mean, we have veterans like GB, who I was watching back in 2016 and 2017. And then you've got a lot of these younger folks. And I think when you have such a broad stroke of experience and life knowledge and different ways to think about things, again, that shows in the broadcast, that shows in the product that's put out. And I do genuinely, I feel like I say this at least once a week. I love this product. I love what we're able to put on. I love the show that we're able to put on. It's so much fun.
No, for sure. Sticking with the curiosity, I just want to ask you, segments. You mentioned a little bit of segments. I want to ask you, what's your favorite segment that you've been a part of?
That's a good question. I've done a couple of segments here in Americas. but not a ton. I think this year I've done a lot more casting than I have desk stuff. I think I've done maybe four desk weekends over the entire year, so it hasn't been nearly as many as I had done last year or stuff like that. I think some of the ones that come to mind are international. I think of the interview that Bala and I did with Angel and Artis. That was so much fun when we were interviewing Angel and Artis was the one feeding us the questions and he didn't know. I mean, that's got to be my favorite. That was just so silly and it was executed so well.
What about like a segment in general? Segments that you weren't a part of. What do you think stands out as the top one in your point of view?
There was this really unhinged segment that we did last year. Was it last year? It's all blurring together, but where Josh was the conspiracy theorist and he was wearing the lab coat and he had his like shoes off and he had the tinfoil hat and everything, and that was just done so well. And I think that again is a testament to how good of a team we have. Being able to do stuff like that, that's method acting. And he just did it off the fly and it was incredibly well done. I think Mimi has had a couple of very similar performances like that where it's just off the cuff. That's not something that's trained. That's not even necessarily something that we do. Our job is commentary and telling stories, and to be able to switch over to something like that is really impressive.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been a very interesting point of view to look at. It's been an interesting point to just kind of observe your career and just having to look at your development. Talking to you various times, multiple times, including right now. If there's one thing that you feel kind of changed the most for you from 2023 to 2024, what do you think is it, and why?
Dang, that's a good question, Pedro.
A lot of good questions, it seems.
It's a really good question. I would say the biggest change is probably perspective. Yeah, I think perspective feels like the biggest change from 23 to 24. Wanting to make sure I'm spending more of my time and energy on the things that matter, the things that truly matter, the things that stand the test of time, the things that are bigger than just, did you have a good cast or not? And I think a lot of that comes in a lot of the stuff that we've talked about before, making sure that newer talent is being brought up, making sure that grander stories are being told. And I think when you zoom out like that, it forces a perspective change. It forces a shift in the way you approach things like developing new talent with a new co-caster, getting to cast an international grand final at the Mercedes-Benz Arena in Shanghai. All of those things, it feels like there is enough of a perspective shift from one year to the next that have kind of shaped the way those things are thought of, the way I'm thinking of those things, the way I approach things like that.
So it's no longer just focusing on yourself, just focusing on the entire scene, right?
Yeah. It's more of I think just to be clear, I felt like I thought a lot about bigger story last year too, but to a greater degree, I think the best way I can describe it again feels like a zoomed out perspective, and a focus on, maybe it's a shift of focus and a zoomed out perspective, both, on bigger picture, but also the things that truly matter at the end of the day.
Okay, and at this point, what do you think is the one thing that you feel truly matters? Is it just opening the door for other talent to discover themselves, build a presence, or do you feel just more so just focusing on just bettering the scene in terms of just atmosphere, camaraderie, inclusiveness, openness? What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say it's a combo of both, to be honest. I think being willing to give of self in order for the bigger story or picture or talent team or production or whatever it is, fill in the blank, but being able to and being willing to give more of self in order for those things to thrive. That feels like the big picture. And again, developing new talent, making sure that talent who are working with us for the very first time feel very much included and they feel cared for and they feel like they have somebody that they can ask questions to and, things like that. I think that's been really fulfilling, and I definitely don't do it perfectly. There are often times I wish I had more to give. I wish I had more that I could invest in people, more that I could develop, and the more that I could, kind of bring along. But I would say that's truly what matters, because I feel like I've said this a couple of times, but I truly do believe it. I think that's where the show is good. That's where the product is good. That's where it's so much bigger than just a closing call or a clever pun or cool alliteration or rhymes or a metaphor, whatever it is. We're getting to tell these outrageous stories of these players for over years. And these are, who knows what they're going to go on to do, but this might not be some of the coolest years. This might not be the coolest years of their lives, but they are going to be some of the coolest years of their lives as they think about things from beginning to end. And so being able to tell that in a meaningful way that gives justice to a lot of those moments reflects when the product and the show is at its best. And I think when it's thinking less of the self and thinking more about big picture, that's where it shines. That's where it's at its best.
Oh, that's a very interesting and very altruistic perspective to have. One that isn't really selfish, is more selfless. And I feel that's one of the things that Valorant is very rich of, having plenty of people being able to just focus on the group, not just themselves. And yeah, it's very great to listen to you talk about all of that stuff and then some. One more question I gotta ask you before I wrap up. Now, as you kind of look towards 2025, sure, we got champions coming up, but still, I just want to just focus on you, not just focusing on champions. What do you think is the one thing that you feel still needs work for you?
I think the big focus is just continuing to build synergy with Dre. I think as I think about leading into what the rest of the year looks like, and then 2025, I think for as much as I think about the big product, I also think about how I can be equally think about how I can be the very best that I can be. And I think at the end of the day, we're storytellers. And so I often think about how can I tell a better story? How can me and whoever it is I'm casting with tell a better story? And so that oftentimes is candidly what I think of. That's what consumes most of my thoughts is how do we tell a better story? So when it comes to 25, when it comes to the rest of this year, I think about what are some of those things that need to be refined in order to tell a better story. And I think synergy with whoever it is you're working with carries so much of that weight. If you're able to combine those things where two people are putting together a story with the same ending, with the same conclusion, and they're of the same mind, I think that's that's where commentary is at its best. So that's what I spend a lot of my time thinking about.
Oh, for sure. And hopefully we'll continue to see more of that and more of your work, Doug, in Champions and in the future. Really do appreciate you taking the time once again for another quick conversation. Well, quote unquote quick.
Yeah,
But
how long did we go?
Around 30 minutes, I believe. But still,
Sorry.
yeah. No, it's all good. It's what I want. In-depth conversations is the things that I'm looking for this channel, not just focusing on post-match player interviews, but still.
Yeah, sure.
Doug, thank you so much, and
A pleasure.
best of luck for you in the future.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Doug.
Sorry, bro. I didn't mean to go long-winded.
It's all good. It's all good.
Thank you, bro. Thank you.
Oh, for sure. Really do appreciate it.